Where traditional methods like relying on historical rainfall patterns are no longer enough, climate-smart agriculture steps in. CNBC Africa spoke to Pranav Singh, a senior manager of new initiatives at MicroSave Consulting, to understand how climate-smart information empowers smallholder farmers for both increased profits and enhanced resilience in the face of climate change.
I think climate information, just to start with talking about what climate information entails and why is it so useful. Climate information is basically providing the right kind of information in a timely manner, especially seeing how the changing climate is adding more variability and making agriculture a more risky venture than it already is. So climate information being delivered in a timely manner, as you pointed out, tailored to the specific needs is imperative. Now, how can we achieve that? I think first and foremost, we have to take into account the users for whom we are building this service. So the demand has to be kept front and center. Now, whether this is farmers who are, what kind of farming practices they're involved in, what are the local context, what are the weather hazards that are most adding to their risks, those need to be understood. Then this needs to be followed by our end user, understanding them as to what their literacy levels are, what are their preferences in terms of how do they like to consume that information. So I think all this to say that farmer participation in the process of planning, of design, and ensuring that they have a say, not just at the very beginning, but also through that whole service as it's being delivered. So feedback loops to make sure that they are able to consistently provide their views on what's working and what's not working, and continuously improving the program. Those are the ways that we can begin to tailor our solution. To this end, technology has a very important role to play. We can use IVR-based mechanisms to collect the sort of feedback from the farmers and tailor our solutions to their needs, which we must acknowledge will keep on changing and evolving, as does the climate hazards and the risk it poses.
Yes, and delivering climate information is very key when it comes to the smallholder farmers. Let's talk about some of the delivery channels. What are the most effective and accessible ways to deliver climate information to smallholder farmers?
I wish the answer for that would have been very straightforward. I think it is very context specific, and it also the right delivery channel would depend on which are the regions, what is the service, what kind of information, climate information we're trying to provide. It also depends on, as I said, the demography itself, what their literacy levels are, how are they, what the infrastructure around that geography is. So all of those contexts need to be sort of accounted for. I can talk about a few channels. All of them would have their pros and cons. So I wouldn't say necessarily one is superior than the other. And I'm happy to talk about a few of the trade-offs. To start with, SMSs are, of course, one of the mechanisms given how much of the phone penetration has been successful in the regions. But of course, it runs into the challenge of, end users who may not be literate would have challenges consuming that information. So we move into audio-based, voice recordings, clips, IVR-based information dissemination. Those can be useful there. And then digital technology has really helped us reach out to farmers. And they also, in addition to just the reach to some degree, they also help us provide visual aids, which are known to be more effective. However, again, limited use, especially amongst women, typically the gender digital divide would sort of act as a barrier there, and that needs to be accounted for. Moving on, there are options like community radio. There are options like community-based kiosks where the people can aggregate, and that's where the information can be provided. So there are quite a few options that have been effective in different contexts. One thing one thing that has been a very clear learning for us has been that a hybrid approach that involves the physical presence and combined with the digital technology, so what we typically call the phygital approach, tends to be more effective. And one of the reasons for that is here technology is not supplanting or replacing existing mechanisms, but sort of supplementing and augmenting their capacity. And more importantly, this involves, elements of trust that the farmers may have in their communities and in the extension workers who they know, or the other agri-value chain players who they have an established relationship with. And typically, that kind of trust helps ensure a higher uptake practice of the climate information that is provided to them.
And I'll pick on technology as an existing communication infrastructure that is very vital when it comes to delivery channels or communicating this to smallholder farmers. But let's look at a value proposition. What are we seeing here? And also, how do we see public-private partnerships and governments contributing to the whole value chain?
I think for governments and PPPs, typically, of course, at a very basic level, there needs to be the communication infrastructure. There needs to be the Med department needs to be sufficiently strengthened so that the systems that are required to basically create accurate climate forecasts, do the ground truthing, and disseminate that information. So the infrastructure that is required for this, as well as the linkages that are required through the government systems. For instance, the Med department might be able to generate the right kind of data, but then that needs to be customized to individual use cases. So the agricultural department will need to step in and make sure that this information is packaged in a way that is useful for them and is further useful for the farmers. So that sort of linkages, they're important. This requires institutional capacity, policies in place, but more importantly, investment in infrastructure. So that's one thing. Of course, communication infrastructure, the better it is, especially the last mile, the easier it is for us to leverage the new technologies and disseminate information more effectively. Beyond this, there's of course scope for not just giving the information, but also demonstrating some of these in practice, because there's nothing like seeing the impacts in action around them and in similar context to the farmers. And so you have basically demonstration, like the specific fields where tests and evaluations can happen and dissemination can happen. In addition to that, there's capacity building that is essential for the farmers to basically understand how to use the information that's coming to them. So if you think of anything on three scales of knowledge, skills, and practice, knowledge is of course just the first information that is provided, but they also need to understand how to apply that, and then finally have the necessary linkages, whether it's the actual drought-resistant seeds that maybe they need to use, which is part of the climate information that we're providing and advisory that we're providing. And so ensuring those linkages are there so that the farmers can indeed practice that. And those are essential investments from the government that would help not just the government, but also private sector on board and play a very active role in this ecosystem.
And all this is well integrated with data, because data is very key when it comes to, establishing existing farming practices. But how do we see it being integrated with impact and measurement on this?
Impact and measurement is essential to sort of ensure that what we are doing is actually creating the desired impact. And it of course, any intervention any program that you're running, you need to constantly monitor it for the desired impact, which means identifying the right variables. So whether this is improved crop yields, or whether this is just reduced crop loss in case of an event or a disaster, depending on what the intent of the program is, we have to identify the right variable. In addition to that, there has to be a baseline evaluation, and then basically there are multiple ways in which this can be done. You can have a control group and you can compare people who are receiving advisory against this control group who do not receive such advisory, and you can measure the impact against that. And this is, of course, essential to sort of catalyze more investment to prove the effectiveness of the program. But at the core of it, I think, ensuring that the farmers continue using your service. So they're not just onboarded as a one-time activity, but are active users. And then constantly being in touch with them, and this could be measured through online surveys or in-person surveys, to make sure that they are actually practicing and therefore are able to reap the benefits of these advisory. Those are essential. Technology, again, plays a very important role here. We have now with GIS and remote sensing technologies, we have a better capability, easier or more, I would say, cost-effective methods of sort of measuring the vegetation cover and yield through those methods, and those going to be incorporated into the impact evaluations that you have built in. But of course, I say that it is essential to measure your progress to make sure that you are indeed creating the impact that you have set out to achieve.